now going to introduce Jeff Selingo, who we adore. Jeff Selingo, this is event number 4. Well, on this trip that we have hosted Jeff, he actually questioned me about this, and I didn't fact check it, and I should have. We have hosted Jeff in 2020, 2021, 2022, and now 2025. This is his 5th event for this book for fan. He has been writing about colleges and universities for more than 2.5 decades, and he's the New York Times bestselling author of a total of 4 books, including the new one, including the one, again, in your hot little hands. This new one is based on 2+ years of research and an original survey of 3,500 parents. It was an instant New York Times bestseller. I like to think we had a little bit to do with the bestseller status. He also is a regular contributor to The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and he's also a special advisor to the president and professor of practice at Arizona State University, a very interesting place to go to school, I might add. He writes a bi-weekly newsletter on all things higher ed called Next, which is must read if you are in that cycle, and I'm assuming most of you are in this cycle at this point. And he co-hosts the podcast Future You, letter U. Joining Jeff is my new favorite person, Beth Arey. I told her when she knows me better, she'll like me more, is what I told her. Beth is the Director of College and Career Services here at ETHS. She has held a variety of roles in secondary and post-secondary education, including positions at the University of Michigan, Lewis University, and Northwestern. I skipped your first one because I wasn't sure how to pronounce CIA, so you can add it in. I didn't want to be like, she said it wrong. She has served as high school director for the Illinois Association of College Admission Counseling and as chair of the College Board Midwestern Regional Council. At ETHS here, she has expanded career and college programming across all grade levels, extended services to weekends and summer months, eliminated the negative stress of class rank, and strengthened access to rigorous coursework. Good job. Now let's offer a warm welcome to just 2 incredible people for a great conversation. Jeff Selingo, Beth Arey.
All right, well, welcome. Welcome to ETHS. Welcome, Jeff. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me. I've been here all afternoon speaking to some students and some staff and faculty, so I really appreciate your hospitality. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you to FAN for having me tonight. Thank you all for coming out on this evening.
We had some fun today with some students and some staff. I think it was fun. We've been kind of rehashing that. I always like to start an event with polling our audience. So we're going to take a second to do that. I can kind of see you, so the lighting is a little different than what we had rehearsed. But I'm going to kind of check out the hands that go up here if I can for a second. If I can see a show of hands of those of you who are from the Evanston community specifically. Okay, so most of you. All right, so that means I need to see a show of hands from those that are from outside the Evanston community. So some of you. Okay, awesome. Made a little trip to Evanston. Then I want to see kind of who is here in the audience that would be a current senior. So a family that has a senior student. All right, now how about junior students? Awesome. And sophomores? Freshmen? And who has students who are younger than freshmen who are here? Yes, I love that. I'm a very much, it's never too early to start
Even
planning.
kindergarten?
Okay. Absolutely. We don't have time for all the things, Jeff. Okay. So how about educators? Someone who's here just to sort of learn the process. So hands, awesome. Okay, so cool. So we have a little bit of a mix.
Nice.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So I want to start a little bit by identifying the work that we do. We're doing this together. We have a lot of years of experience. At ETHS, the mission that College and Career Services does is all about awareness, access, and success. So in getting your book and the opportunity to do this, I'm very excited that your book is about, being aware and gaining access and the opportunity for students to be successful. You have books. I wish I would have brought Post-it notes for you. I don't know if y'all can kind of see my book here. We do have lots of Post-it notes through Team ASAP, which is one of our clubs. And I was like, oh, too late to go get the Post-it notes for everybody, because I am going to rattle off some pages of some of Jeff's work.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I figured
You're
don't have it.
annotating it for them.
Yeah, I don't think you have it memorized, but I can point them out to you if you need help. But the introduction, okay, page 13. I want to just kind of set the tone for what Jeff has put out there in the introduction. He says, and this is just an abbreviated version as a quote, "Let's replace anxiety with excitement."
Enjoy.
That's the book. That's the work. Let's replace anxiety with excitement. And anyone who knows me and knows this work, that's what we do. So I get the honor to now ask you all sorts of questions about the work that Jeff has been doing for all of these years. And this book in particular is going to knock your socks off, because it did mine in the first couple of pages, actually. I do want to say one more thing about work that he did this week while he was here. I did have the opportunity, before being asked to do this, I saw him at ISAC, which is the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. There was a program there. And he kept pointing out that the motto of the Illinois Student Assistance Commission is "College changes everything." And that is something that I firmly believe in, and Jeff kept saying that he firmly believes in as well. I'm a first-gen college student, and there's no other way to explain my college experience than it changed everything for me. And I know you mentioned that your dad was a teacher.
High school music teacher.
Awesome. And but the rest of your family seemed to be
My mother did not go to college.
Yes.
She was a high school teacher's aide. My brother and sister, who are older than I am, they went to college basically 5-10 miles from home. So I was the first in my family to venture any further than that. It's changed my life. But I think the important part of that shirt that they were wearing the other day, college changes everything. They didn't say which college.
Right.
It was just college.
Exactly.
And I think that's important. A lot of colleges change everything. It's not just 25 or 50. Yeah. There's a lot of colleges.
I actually considered wearing tonight a college
The
t-shirt.
James Belushi
Yeah,
shirt,
just
yeah.
college.
Yep.
Yeah. So here we go.
That's a dated reference. Some of
Yeah,
the students
I know.
might not get the
Yeah.
James Belushi one. But.
That was going to be my look for the evening. So this is your fourth book. So what got you interested and keeps you interested in sustaining your work in this field of reporting and writing on college, especially since you didn't have like a real focus on that growing
Yeah,
up?
so I think there's a couple of things that really sustain my focus. The first is to give you knowledge and power about this process. We often feel anxiety-ridden about it. We used to feel a lot more excitement and joy about it, and I want to bring that excitement and joy back to that process. It is a process of discovery about what's next. High school should be about high school, not about jumping through every hoop possible to get into, quote-unquote, the right college. So how do we do that? The first thing that I think we need to do, or the first thing we need to do, is become better consumers about this process. This is probably the most expensive product you're going to buy in life, and I know that people hate when I call it a product. Colleges particularly hate that because they want to pull at your emotional heartstrings. They want you, if you went to college, they want you to remember those fond days, meeting professors, discovering your passion, friends, maybe your partner for life, and they want to pull at those emotional heartstrings to draw you back in to making a decision that may not be in your best interest or in your kid's best interest. And that's particularly about money. And hopefully tonight we will be talking about the cost of college, and what I think sometimes happens is in this process, this anxiety-ridden process where colleges especially feel like they have more power, and they feel, they tug at these heartstrings, where they do make, I think families sometimes make bad financial decisions as a result. Second, I want to bring the joy back to high school. And how do we do that? We do that when we have more agency in this process. We often feel like we're at sea. Like everyone else is controlling us. The College Board is telling us, to take the SAT. The Common App is telling us to apply to more and more colleges. Colleges are telling us to come visit and show that demonstrated interest. We often think we don't have a lot of control over the process. And I actually want to talk about tonight where you have control is finding colleges that are a good fit for you and moving away from this focus on selectivity and prestige and name brand and rankings. Because all of those things, as I will tell you tonight, don't always correlate with quality. We often think they do, especially acceptance rate. So you all got a book tonight. At the back of the book, there are 75 colleges that I list. Most of them have acceptance rates 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, and you're all going to go to those pages now.
Don't jump ahead. It'll be there
waiting. And as I've been testing this out with, I live in a community like this outside of Washington, D.C., and as I've been testing this with parents, they would say to me, but Jeff, that must not be a very good school. It accepts 50, 60% of students. That's a head count measure. Those are schools that have done very well at attracting more and more applicants. In fact, the 57 most selective colleges and universities in this country have tripled the number of applications they've received in the last 20 years. And you know what they didn't do? The size of their freshman class is essentially the size of this auditorium. They haven't changed that. Not literally, by the way, the size of this auditorium, but they haven't changed the size of their freshman class in those 20 years. So of course, their acceptance rate is going to come down from 25 to 8% or whatever it might be. So I want us to take more control over this process. And we can do this as a collective community and as parents and students to make choices that are best for us.
I love that on page 247, you said, I'll be honest, if you're stuck on prestige, this book isn't for you. So you say, so the title being Dream College, for an audience, could be a little bit of a bait and switch. Like if you're luring in the reader who thinks you're going to give them the scoop on how to get into their dream school, and then you read the book, you're actually coaching them, and you call it a playbook, on how to find a different vantage point of what a dream could be.
Yeah, and I want to give them a map. That's essentially what this book is, because as I wrote a book a couple of years ago that's also outside called Who Gets In and Why. And it was the year I spent inside the college admissions process at 3 colleges and universities. I sat with them, watched them, and during the Q&A tonight, if you want to ask questions about that book, feel free. I sat in there and watched how they made their decisions. And as I went out and talked about that book, I would often hear from parents and students and counselors, but Jeff, what if we can't get into those places? On average, some of these places have, again, 7-10% acceptance rate. What if we can't get in? What if we don't want to go to those places? What if they aren't the right fit for us? What if we can't afford those places, those institutions? How do we make sense of the rest of higher ed? And that was really a compelling argument to me. I've been in and around higher ed for 25 years. I've visited thousands of campuses, or hundreds of campuses. I've spent time with presidents and faculty members and students. And I get it, right? You're possibly buying this product once, twice, 3 times in your life. Maybe you went to college, but you went to college 30 years ago. It's very different right now. And so I understand why we then race to the rankings. I understand why we look at the sweatshirts that everyone else is wearing. I understand why we look at the stickers on the back of car windows. I understand why we use School Links or Naviance or these other programs that high schools use to help you determine where to apply, because the world of higher education, 4,000 institutions in the US, a couple thousand that are 4-year institutions. Most institutions, 40% of institutions are below 1,000 students. So even if we're talking 1,000 plus students at 4-year colleges, we're still talking about a universe of 1,200 to 1,400 colleges. That's incredibly confusing to all of us. And so what I want to do with this book is to give you a roadmap that helps you make sense of those colleges and what are you looking for. Because every college, I know some of you are juniors, maybe you've gone on some college tours, every college will tell you, we're going to take care of your kid. We're going to help them get hands-on experience. We have the major for you. We're going to help them get the job. How do you cut through that noise to find out, A, what are you looking for, and then how you find it? That's what I hope to do not only tonight, but through this book.
Yeah, so you mentioned the college search in a traditional way is often referred to as like the funnel method. And that may be what some of you in the audience have already started doing or have done for the seniors in here, right? Yep. Where you put everything you want, everything that's optional, into the funnel, and out comes the school or the list, right? It's a very traditional way of doing things. And sometimes kids put in so much criteria that no school shows up, right? from School Links or whichever search engine they're using. And so really, you mentioned something in the book about it being like all the data you could find and finding the needle in the haystack. But really, you mentioned that it's...
The haystack is just getting bigger.
Yeah, but really we're looking for multiple needles. And I think that was really profound.
Yeah, and again, it's why we titled it Dream School, because we tend to think there is a single dream school, and there isn't. You have multiple options. And what I think ends up happening, and I did this when I was putting together that list in the back of the book, none of those schools at the back of the book are perfect. Some are stronger in some areas, some are not. And what I found when I wrote a whole chapter about the data that went into that book, because what ended up happening was I kept looking for those good schools over and over again. I kept looking for that proverbial needle, and all I kept doing was adding more data to that haystack. And I think that's what we do as parents and students. We're constantly scouring Facebook groups and Reddit, and we're asking our neighbors and our friends, and we're looking at every magazine and website out there to find out where is this right college that's a right fit for my kid at the right price. And what I want to tell you tonight is there are elements that you should be looking for, but don't try to find that perfect fit, because there really isn't such a thing. There are multiple fits for you. And why is that a good thing? Because if you don't get into your first choice, or it maybe is not the right financial fit or not the right social fit, there are other options for you. And I dislike this idea that we have to have one school for us, because most of the students that I've interviewed for this book, a reporter asked me about the students that I interviewed for this book who are either undergraduates now or have already graduated, and she had read my last book, and she said, Jeff, it was interesting. This book, everybody seemed calm, cool, and collected, and the last book, everybody seemed anxious. What was the difference? The last book, I was interviewing students who were in high school, and then in this book, I interviewed students who were already in college or post-college, and they all realized that things worked out for a reason, and where they ended up was the right fit for them. They found their people, they found their passion, they found their faculty members that ended up being mentors to them. Yes, not everything ends up being the right fit, and students do end up transferring, but for the majority of students, they land where they're supposed to land.
I find it interesting you're bringing up that families they dig and try and find all these data points. But in my 20 plus years of counseling, students often come in and say they want to go to a good school, but they can't even describe
what good is.
And they often think that these schools are something that they deserve because they earned it by their grades or whatever, or that they want something with like more luster or like prestige, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about what makes a college prestigious? You talked a little bit about it from the admit rate, but I don't have the page written down.
So there's two things when we think about prestige. One is the rankings. So if we think of, let's just take the rankings that have been around the longest, the U.S. News and World Report, where I got my start in 1994 as a summer intern. So I probably could have stopped them back then by like just shutting it all down, but I didn't have the chance to do that. But I often, when I talk to students about this book, I first go around the room and I say, what do you think is the marker of a good college? And they'll name things like, engaged faculty or good sports or small classes or, good outcomes in terms of the job market. They'll name a lot of things. And then I'll say, do you know what the biggest factor in the U.S. News and World Report rankings is? 25% is a survey that is sent to college presidents and college admissions deans that they take ranking and rating other schools. 25%. It's the biggest factor in the rankings. Now, of that survey, about 30% fill that out. So 70% never fill it out. So it's about 30% response rate. And I've asked people who have received this ranking or this rating, and they usually rate their competitors low because they want to make sure they depress those institutions. But more than that, I say to them, so Mr. President, Ms. Admissions Dean, when was the last time you were on that campus? When was the last time you sat in classes? When was the last time you experienced the student experience? It's all based on perception. And that's what feeds the rankings over and over and over again. And by the way, if you look at any of the rankings, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, any of the rankings, there will always be an outlier in the top 10. They have to manipulate the methodology in order to get a surprise in there, or else you won't look at them. But for the most part, all of these rankings are the same schools over and over again, which, by the way, then everybody applies to them. And because everybody applies to them, their acceptance rate goes low. So let me tell you about something about acceptance rate. So that's number one. Rankings do not equal quality. Second, neither does acceptance rate. And here's why. I told you earlier about number of applications going way up, size of the freshman class. You might care about acceptance rate, but colleges care about something called yield rate. Yield is the percentage of students accepted who show up, who enroll. That's very important because you could apply to 10 schools, you could get into 10 schools, you only could go to one. So every school wants to be that one. And some of the most elite schools can now play games to increase that yield rate. How do they do that? They keep students outside of the admit pool until they really need them or they're sure they're going to apply. So in the last book, I sat in the admissions office at Davidson College in North Carolina. And during the admissions process, they rated students on something called LTE, likelihood to enroll. And they would look at, like, when was the last time somebody from this high school applied? Where does the sibling go to college? Where, why, if you're in the essay portion of the Common App now, you'll often get a why Davidson or why Rice. It's a why essay. Like, why do you want to come here? So they are looking for clues like that. The other thing they use is early decision, early action, wait lists. They're always trying to get you to commit. And here's why yield rates are important to you and how they play out in the acceptance rate. So 20 years ago, and I'll put some real numbers around this in real institutions, Brandeis, George Washington, Syracuse, and Duke all had similar yield rates. And in fact, there's a chart in the book that shows almost all colleges were grouped together around similar yield rates because students applied to fewer colleges. So there was less competition to actually yield them. Today, Duke has gone from 40% to 60% because they play those games I talked about earlier. And Syracuse, Brandeis, and George Washington have gone from about 40% to 20 to 15, in some cases closer to 10%. Now, what has happened is that they've had to accept more students every year, those colleges, to yield enough students to fill those seats. So what happens is their acceptance rate then goes up. So now their acceptance rate might go from 30 to 40 to 50 to 60% over the course of 10 or 15 years. And you as a consumer start to see that and you say, oh, what's happened? Syracuse must not be a very good college anymore, or university anymore, because their acceptance rate has gone up. Their acceptance rate has gone up because they have to yield those students because students are applying to more colleges. It has nothing to do with the quality of the institution. Now, maybe other things have happened to affect the quality of the institution. I'm not going to argue against that. But it's not because their acceptance rate has gone up. And so we need to really stop equating acceptance rate with quality.
You skipped ahead. That's okay. So I'm gonna see if we can round that out a little bit. So to a question I had for later. So what's good today wasn't good yesterday and may not be tomorrow. Can you speak to that idea of regional brands and national trends and what has contributed to that sort of rise? You talk about the out-of-state recruitment and stuff like that. We can kind of touch on that with the Big Ten.
What's really happening now is a redefinition of value in higher ed, and that's largely because college has become extremely expensive. And so what I'm seeing in both the data and the stories that I tell. So we had a student, Emily, who's in the book, applied to a number of private colleges, including the University of Chicago, early decision, because I know we have a mixed crowd here tonight. Early decision means you apply usually around November 1st, you find out in December, and if you get in, it's a binding decision. She applied early decision to Chicago, she did not get in. Her mother started to worry a little bit about money because most of the colleges on her list were privates. But her grandmother offered to pay for her application fee as long as she applied to top 25 universities. She wouldn't pay for anything below top 25. So her mother said, well, that's not going to work. We have to look at a number of public universities, both in-state and out-of-state. And her mother came across the University of Mississippi, where she would have a chance to get a full ride scholarship, get into the honors college, have support for undergraduate research and study abroad. It came down at the end to University of Mississippi, Rice, and Vanderbilt. Rice and Vanderbilt, she would have to pay maybe half price, more than that. Ole Miss, she would get a full ride. And when she went down the weekend before she had to make a decision to visit Rice for one last time, her and her father were making a pro-con list, and the only pro she could come up with was that people would know she was smart because she went to Rice. She ended up at Ole Miss. Now, in audiences, I'm not gonna, you may have your opinions on all this, and often in audiences, people sometimes give out an audible gasp, but that somebody would choose, a University of Mississippi over Rice or Vanderbilt. But I had to reach back out to her recently because an excerpt from the book was in the New Yorker, and they wanted a fact check with her. And so she's now has graduated. She's on a Fulbright in Germany, and I had a chance to talk to her, and I said, so tell me about your experience now. And she said, first of all, we saved all this money. Now I have more flexibility. My parents have more flexibility to give me some of that money to live on my Fulbright in Germany. I'm here with students who have student debt. I'm here with students who spent all their savings to go to college. And I said, so, you're with students probably from the Ivy League and others. She said, yes. And I tell them I go to Ole Miss, and they give me a look, and we talk about it for a minute, and then we forget about it. And nobody ever asked me again. And I think this is happening over and over again, where parents and students are saying, what is really worth it? And is there a value to prestige decision to make? And increasingly what's happening is that students are spending more time at either their in-state publics, they're going out of state to other publics, which are still, on average, could be cheaper than privates. Those publics might have honors colleges that make those big publics seem smaller. They might be giving out merit aid that brings that price down. And so increasingly, we're thinking about the value of what we're paying for over prestige. This is starting to happen. And again, there's data in the book about it. And I think that's an appropriate decision increasingly for parents and families to make. Thank you.
I want to address one more thing about the top 25 that you bring up in the book, is questioning, is your kid a top 25 kid, right? And on page 23, you mention 11th graders have confidence bias, and that parents might have an inflated sense of students' academic abilities. And something I just wanted to throw out there to the audience for consideration as we are looking at the college search. And that I also want to mention, and maybe something that you might consider maybe feeding into, is that outside of academia and people who have maybe high-level, maybe academic jobs or professional careers, a lot of people don't know these colleges.
You mean in the top
regular
25?
people?
Yeah. You mean in the top 25?
Yeah. If you read, nationally, if you went around and just started naming these schools, especially smaller schools that maybe here we think are really prestigious, highly selective, these competitive schools kids are going for, and you left the arena, right, that they're in, other people in the world wouldn't be oh, where's they would not know them.
So 3 thoughts on this. One is, we have data in the book, as you referenced, is that so we have, I know, sophomores and freshman parents and students in the audience tonight. When you're starting the search, you have a pretty wide lens. You're actually following the advice in the book to widen your lens on college. So we got data based on where students went to high school at an aggregate level and a little bit about their lists, right? They use a number of different websites to create college lists, so I was able to get this data at an aggregate level. And what was interesting to me is that freshman and sophomore, and even into junior year, students have a pretty wide variety of colleges on their list. I often think that students start the search midstream, meaning they just start putting names on a list. And that's often what they did in this data that we got. I often encourage students to start further upstream. What do you want out of college? Do you want big, small? Within a radius here of Chicago, you could visit an urban research university. You could visit a small liberal arts college. You could visit a big public university. Don't worry about the names yet. Just try to get a sense of what you want. That's where I think freshmen and sophomore in particular should start their search. Don't worry about the names.
Have you been to my program?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I think you just...
Instead, because I think what ends up happening, we just start putting in the names. But even when we put names down, even sophomore year, it's a wide variety of institutions. And then as we move into junior year, it narrows. And what's interesting as we looked at this data, every month going into senior year, it narrows. And as it should, you're not going to apply to 50 schools, you're going to apply to fewer. But as it narrows, it also moves up the prestige rank. And why is that? It often, by the way, does that at schools, at high-achieving high schools. And it happens because a little bit of grade inflation, where students just feel more empowered to apply to those highly ranked schools. First, SAT and ACT scores might come back, and they might be surprised at their scores. But they also start to listen in the community to where everyone else is applying, where everyone else is going. And they start to say, wow, if that student's applying there, I should too. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to block out. Because then what ends up happening is everybody applies to the same set of schools. So that's number one in terms of how we're thinking about this, right? And how this list narrows. The second thing to remember about hiring and who knows these colleges is we have a lot of data on how students get hired. And one of the things that we found is that most hiring pools are regional in nature. So if you go to school in the Southeast, you're more likely to end up working in the Southeast. You go to school in the West, you're more likely to be working in the West. It doesn't mean that's the only place you're going to work in your life, but the alumni ties beyond the Ivy Plus schools are very regional in base, and I will even argue some of the Ivy Plus schools are in that way too. So as you're thinking about where you want to go to school, this is not just a 4-year decision often, it may be longer. And that's important to remember that not everybody knows the schools that you know because they know them in that region.
Thank you. So here at ETHS, many of you know this, we have what we call Individualized Career and Academic Plans, or ICAPs. And I tell students all the time that they can have the same courses and the same activities as each other, but because of the experience that they have, they could have a different plan, right? So what they choose to do after high school could be different. Their interests, skills, and values are different. And you address in the book about looking at students' values, right, and how they want to approach the college search. And I think that's really important. On page 137, you talk about looking at students' identities, the communities they belong to, and how they really want to make an impact on college campuses rather than fitting into what the college is looking for. That was really helpful for me as a counselor as I'm approaching next week's, we have our freshman, sophomore evening program, how we could look at not having kids, like you said in your book, fit into the box of what you need to do for colleges to admit you, but really do more of that reflective stuff that we're doing with our ICAPs. And so I wanted to know if you could touch on the finite admission game versus the infinite college game that you have.
Yeah, so we often think of, again, as we think about high school, we think of this finite game of getting into college rather than the longer game of life that goes on beyond college. And how do we think about that in terms of the college process? As I said earlier, we often focus on the midstream, and I want us to move upstream. Here's the other thing I want us to think about. When we're going to visit colleges, students will often start at their reach schools. So as you put together a list, you're going to have reach schools, you're going to have target schools, you're going to have likely schools. And you're going to put that list together often with the help of your counselor. And what I often see families do is they go to those schools that are the reach schools. and they're reach by definition. Those are schools that you may or may not get in, but the chances of you getting in are probably more not than yes. But that's where you start. And here's what happens when you do that. First of all, it's impossible to go visit every school on your list. But if you start there, you're going to be comparing everything else to those reach schools. So even if you see a great school that's in your target list or your likely list, you're always going to say, but it's not Harvard, or it's not Stanford, or whatever that might be, or Williams, or Amherst. Just picking among the top 5 there. I would actually like you to flip the script if you are going to go visit schools. Why don't you start at more of your likely schools? First, you might be surprised at what you find. You might find real hidden gems that you end up liking. But then as you go visit, if you're going to go visit other schools, especially those reach schools, you're going to now be comparing them to your likely schools. And you're going to see some of the issues. So I'm going to tell the story about William in the introduction. So William, who's in the introduction of the book, grew up near the University of Minnesota, and he ED'd to Columbia. Now, a couple of days before the ED applications were due, he still had on his list for ED Stanford, Northwestern, and Columbia. And as he told me, he wanted to do early decision to the most selective college he could get into, because it was all about selectivity. It wasn't about fit, it was about selectivity. So he ends up applying ED to Columbia. He finds out in early December, he got in, great, fantastic. As he told me, he won the lottery. And then he shows up in August of his freshman year, and the high of that win wore off very quickly. Why? Well, the first thing he wants to do is research with a professor. He did research as a high school student because he lived near the University of Minnesota. And his advisor said, yeah, that professor doesn't do research with undergraduates. You're not going to be able to do that. He was signing up for classes. There was a class he really wanted. And his advisor said, yeah, the waiting list for that is so long, you might get into it junior or senior year. He wanted to try out for some clubs that he never had a chance to really participate in high school. And as he said, the competition to get into some clubs was as intense as trying to get into Columbia. The core curriculum moved so fast, he couldn't really enjoy it. And so by the time he came home at winter break, he told his mom, I think I want to transfer. And at the end of his freshman year, he did. He transferred to the University of Minnesota. And when I met up with him, I said, William, all those things you ended up not liking at Columbia very quickly, you could have actually discovered during the college search. But by the way, not even visiting Columbia. He could have found out many of those things by just researching Columbia. And he said, I know, but I was blinded by prestige. And this is where, what do we want? He wanted undergraduate research. He knew that. But yet he went to a place that didn't really encourage it. So this is where we start with what we want and then try to match the schools to that, rather than try to twist ourselves into a pretzel to fit into this, or I guess I'm going to mix metaphors now, but try to fit into this like square, even though we're a circle, right? To fit into a place that, to be honest with you, they have 10, 12 other students for that seat. They don't really care. Where these other places, they're actually going to love you back. They're going to give you that support that you need as an undergraduate.
Well, I have to admit, my favorite parts of the book are really more about like the philosophy of practice, because it's what I do all the time. But obviously we need data, we need research to support all of that.
And there's a lot of stories in the book.
Oh,
It's not just data.
It's fast. Yeah, it's a good read. But of all of the data, page 141, Nessie's survey on student engagement versus everyone else is really interesting. Can you speak to the survey results, particularly the difference in participation in experimental learning between the categories? Do you remember that?
I do.
Figure 6.1?
Yeah, this is my favorite part of the book, because we assume that students at more selective colleges are more engaged in their learning. And what this shows, so Nessie is a national survey of student engagement. It's been given for 20 years to college freshmen and college seniors. Over 1,600 colleges have participated. Hundreds of thousands of students participate every year. I love this survey. The thing I hate about it is they don't release the results to the public. They release the results back to the schools that participate. Now, you can ask for the results, and some colleges, by the way, showcase the results. And I love this survey because it's about everything you want out of college. How often do they talk to faculty members? How often do they study? How often do they work with peers? What is the living community like? What is the internships like? What is the out-of-site of work like? What is extracurricular? How much they're engaged in the process. So they wouldn't release any of the survey results to me, but I said, well, I'm kind of curious. Do more selective colleges have higher engagement? So I sent them a list separated by selectivity, 0 to 20%, 0, or nobody, I guess nobody has 0, 1% to 20%. Frank Bruni wrote a great piece years ago about how Stanford actually had a 0% acceptance rate. It was very funny, where nobody got in. They were so selective, nobody got in. But anyway, so 1 to 20%, 20 to 40%, 40%, 60%, et cetera. What was fascinating when the results came back, I didn't know what to expect. The results came back. The differences between those tiers of selectivity were minuscule. Now, highly selective colleges did perform better on many measures, but not every measure. There was a lot of overlap. One that I found fascinating, student to faculty interaction. Higher at schools between 20 and 40% than 0 and 20%. Very much like William found, right? Professors didn't really care about him as an undergraduate. They were more interested in their research and their graduate students. Now, you brought up experiential learning.
Yeah.
This is the one area where highly selective colleges did do much better than everyone else. Experiential learning, internships, study abroad, some undergraduate research, although that wasn't William's experience at Columbia. And I often call that about the how you go to college. You can actually do undergraduate research at a range of institutions. You could do study abroad at a range of institutions. You could find internships. Often what happens is that those schools, and this is what I tell these schools deeper in the rankings, if you focus on experiential learning, you could surpass all these highly selective colleges. But that's the how of college. If you know going in to these lesser selective colleges that you have to get an internship, we talk about this in the book, that you have to do undergraduate research or try to do undergraduate research, that you might want to study abroad. As long as you do those things, on every other measure of student engagement, you're going to be just as good or in some cases better than the more selective colleges. That to me is the piece you control. You have a lot more control over that experiential learning.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of our journey.
Great.
Oh.
Well, no, I'm not great. For you. I know. I hope they have great questions out there, and I want to give them a chance to ask those
Okay,
questions.
I'll let you have that. So Dream School is written as a playbook to the college search, as we've discussed. Your research found what really matters. What are the critical components to finding your dream school? But I want to preface that with, like, regardless of parents' education level or families' experiences, right? Previously, so they could have other students who have previously attended college, the family could have. The student who's currently going through the process is going through it for the first time, right? So I want to make sure everybody understands that. Every student is going through it for the, yeah. So acknowledging that, right, we know that we need to treat every student as their own process. And so you have 4 critical components. Are you wanting to share them tonight?
I'm going to share those quickly. There's many critical components, but I felt like I had to boil it down to, I think, the most critical ones. Often these ended up at the schools in the back of the book. They don't have every single one of them, but they have many of them. Number 1, what I call a supportive start. The transition from high school to college is difficult for many students. Financial, emotional, academic. Many of us, if we went to college, there was this old trope where the professor would get up at the front of the room, say, look to your right, look to your left, one of you won't be here at the end of the semester. I'm sorry, that just doesn't work anymore. I think, in fact, in my survey of 3,000 plus parents, the number one thing they wanted in a good college was student success. They wanted their students to be successful. They wanted people to care about them. So the first thing I'm looking for is a place that has built a first-year experience. They're often called that. They look different in different places. So a place like St. Olaf, Denison, Furman will build these cohorts, these smaller cohorts, where students will take essentially a college 101 course. It's how to go to college. They will be assigned to the smaller cohort, so they will get to know other students, sometimes outside of their major. make those connections that are critical. They'll get to have a full-time professor, sometimes again outside their major, so a professor will be seen as approachable to them. They'll extend orientation throughout the year, because we know if you overwhelm students with every single piece of orientation 3 days before school starts, they're going to forget 75% of it anyway. They're going to assign advisors to them in those early days. They're going to put them in living learning communities so that they find their people. These colleges that have these first-year experiences, a place like Furman, by the way, has extended it throughout, where they build up this scaffolding around students, essentially freshman and sophomore year, and then they start to take it down as they move into their senior year and into the job market. But this idea that we should just have weed-out courses, that we try to weed out students, I'm sorry, it's a very old way of thinking about student success, and I want a place that's going to support my kid. And this is particularly important right now. I can't tell you how many, I'm in a lot of Facebook and Reddit groups and others, and parents were telling me, or were saying in these groups in early September of this year, my kid called me, it's like day 2 of school, and they want to come home. They want to transfer. So you want a place that's going to give you that supportive start, number one. Number two, connections. Connections are critically important. The connections to each other, but professors and faculty in particular. Often when you go on college tours, you're never going to see a faculty member. Maybe you'll see one, maybe you'll see two. Maybe they'll give a fantastic presentation, and you'll be like, oh my God, I wish my kid would have that professor. By the way, you might never have that professor. Maybe they only teach graduate students. Maybe they only teach a senior seminar. I want to know who's going to teach my kid that first year, especially that first semester, because that first semester is critical to everything else that follows. So look at who are the professors assigned in the major you might be thinking about. Or if you're undecided, do they have like a program that helps bring students in as undecided majors? Maybe you can find videos of those professors. Maybe you can look at their syllabus to see if that's something that you're interested in. But find those professors, and then if you're on campus, see if you could go meet some of them, or ask other undergraduates, not just the tour guide, who's your favorite professor and why? Number two. Number three, hands-on learning. Getting that critical experience, whether those are internships, externships, co-ops, but even projects in college, undergraduate research, even a job in college where the institution is really thinking about the skills that you're learning that you can actually apply elsewhere. But just college for college's sake without some sort of experiential learning is not going to serve you very well in the job market. And then finally, you want to go to a place that has the resources to invest in you. You probably are reading in the news almost every day about colleges making cutbacks and colleges going out of business. I'm less worried about colleges going out of business. I'm more worried about, is your major going to survive? A question to ask. Look how big it is. Is it big enough to survive? Or are there other cuts that they're making? Read the student newspaper. As I say in the chapter 9 of the book, look at the bond ratings. There's a lot of clues you can find out about what are the financial concerns at colleges. Those are the 4 things that you're looking for.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you.
Thank you.